thank you for coming. I think most of you know probably Corey and Kathie, but I would like to introduce them in case you don't. Corey Postiglione and Kathie Shaw. Abstraction is metaphor, and I think I've got a lot of questions to ask, but shall I just let you get started, or is that, would you, more than a kind of, let me do that, go ahead.
Okay.
No, I think we're just waiting to listen more than.
Again, thank you for coming. Anyway, I have to start with acknowledgments because this thing doesn't just sort of happen. So firstly, we would like to thank the hard work of curator, Dr. Adrienne Kochman, for organizing the logistics of this large exhibition. Also, a shout out to Olivia Rozdowski, who has left, but she was here at the very beginning. Yeah, and we love her. Elena, where's Elena? Yeah. Elena for her expertise in helping with the installation of the work and her sensitive work with the lighting of the space, which is so critical to how this whole thing looks.
She did all the lighting.
Yes, she did all the lighting. And also Alexandra, the marketing consultant, for her informative press release, very clear, and with helping to organize this talk. And also, where's Christina? Who's going to be on the, you going to be on the camera?
I can't.
Maybe. And the wonderful, creative, we need the catalog.
Oh, thank you. Elena will get it.
It's a pitch, no. And the wonderful, creative, and thoughtful catalog designed by Zoe Jackson. And it is beautiful. You'll have to take a look at it at some point. And a big thank you to all the staff. We personally want to thank also Tom Wozniak for his very sensitive and insightful review of our work for the Third Coast online publication. We don't know him, but he really wrote a very beautiful piece. And finally, many thanks to the long-standing vision of the Ukrainian Institute for their commitment to the best exhibitions of modern and contemporary art.
Thank you.
So, just to begin, what we're trying to do here today is do a little introduction about where these works came for both me and Kathie. There are two themes running through this show. One, this idea of abstraction as a metaphor, having some relation to the world that we live in. But also the fact that Kathie and I share a studio space together. And what is that like? So I know Adrienne's very interested in that. But I guess in a lot of respects it's unusual. But the big question is, how does our work relate to each other? How do we work together? All those questions we'd like to raise at some point. Now for my work, I brought this little sketch in that this used to just hang in the studio space. It was the beginning of this idea of some kind of visual metaphor, some kind of maze-like effect. I had worked with the Labyrinth for 10 years prior to this. The Labyrinth is another metaphor for life's passages. But then I moved to this more circular form. And what's interesting is I didn't realize right away that I was working with ovals. Now, I know that seems pretty obvious, but I was doing all these things by hand, you know, freehand. So I got the idea to actually make some templates. So these are the things that I use for, you know, to create these curves in all the work that I do. And I use, you can see there are obviously different sizes. It all has to do with scale. Depends on how big I'm making the painting. I've done a painting that was, actually it was in 2 parts. It was 7 by 15 feet. So for that one, I had to have made a 5-foot oval to make that work with that, you know, that size, that scale. These are, by the way, I started again in a kind of primitive sense of cutting these by hand. It was a long process. Going to Kinko's and having printed an oval and then, you know, scribing that and cutting it by hand. Eventually, I had these laser cut. I had somebody at Columbia College that could do that for me. And she was the one who actually created, finally, the 5-foot oval that ingeniously came in parts, like a puzzle, and I could put it together. So I wanted these curves to be absolutely perfect. And the laser cut solution was the best. So that's really how this all got started. One more thing without getting too deep into this. 2 things. One was a really interesting essay by Frederick Jameson. I taught theory at Columbia for over 25 years, contemporary theory. And he was one of the people that I read, I had my students read. And this is taken from postmodernism or the cultural logic of late capitalism. But to cut to the chase, at the very end of the piece, he kind of suggests where the art should come from to somehow elaborate this idea. How do you do it visually? And one of the key sentences was a global cognitive mapping. And I just really got onto that on a social as well as a spatial scale. So cognitive mapping, I always see these things as a kind of mapping. And actually Kathie's work also incorporates some of that idea, some of that image in her work. And one more thing, I'm just going to throw this out. As early as 1999, I did a discussion, I wrote a paper for the College Art Association. This was in Los Angeles. And it was a panel discussion. And the title of my piece was Semiotic Abstraction, or Sometimes a Square is Not Just a Square. The resignification of recent abstract painting. So the resignification is the metaphor. How it exists outside of just its formal elements. But I'm going to turn it over to Kathie.
Well, my story is probably a bit simpler, I guess.
Yes and no.
I started out working to survive. I spent most of my adult life working, although I went to the Art Institute, and then later on I went to architecture school at UIC. And then when the economy collapsed in 2008, it sort of changed everything. And the architecture profession in particular just completely fell apart. There were no jobs at all for years. And so we were just starting to rent a studio. Corey needed one he needed one anyway. So I thought, well, hey, I might as well just go in there and start working again. And I, started out doing some photography, and then I was working with collage, and then but always in the back of my mind was, okay, what do I want to say with these things? And one day reading the New York Times, I came across this photograph, and since I do photography, I came across this photograph that was almost like it was a black and white image of the London Olympic Stadium under construction. And that stadium was a complete financial disaster. And I don't know how much any of you know about Olympic finances, but they're usually a disaster for the city that undertakes them. And many of these giant stadiums just fall into ruin after the Olympics are over, and the city is holding the bag, needing to pay for these things. So that inspired me to go into the studio and start this series of pictures that are based on photography. These are all from photographs, but doing them in charcoal with an acrylic background. And I spent several years working on this series, but I eventually realized, I titled it Post-Apocalyptic Trash, because the whole time I was thinking that the subject matter for these charcoal pieces tended toward very dystopian subjects, like, these Olympic stadiums. Then I even did one about the atomic bombs that were dropped in Japan. And I did one about the roller coaster that ended up in the Atlantic Ocean during Hurricane Sandy, But these things were taking me forever. And I just thought, I just can't do this. So eventually I worked my way back to painting. And so that's when I started working with oil paint again, and just, but I couldn't get away from these subjects. So after the fact, Corey, who does a lot of looking online at things, he's like, oh, Kathie, look at these I found online, these pictures of the ice melting in different parts of the world, and how much they resemble the paintings I was doing. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of what's in my head. That's what I see these images also, from time to time.
The whole series that Kathie did of these is now at Purdue University in their collection.
Yeah, all but these two. These are the
all
two that are left. And I was thrilled that they decided to take these pieces, because I thought there's nobody in the world that's going to want to have these things in their home. They're so so they took them, and they have quite a large collection that they have amassed over several years, but all through donations, so everybody who contributes to that collection is donating. So anyway, the titles in my work kind of tell the story. That's kind of how it works for me. I don't know. For instance, that one over there is Fireflies in Unison. And this kind of brings me back to my childhood, because I love fireflies, and I started thinking that, I haven't seen fireflies for a long time. Where are they? What happened to them? And so I decided to do a painting about it. And then I discovered from a friend that there's a place in the Smoky Mountains where fireflies all fire at the same time. You know, it's like their mating ritual or something, and there's only like 1 or 2 species. There are 2,000 species of fireflies in the world, but there are only like a couple that fire like that, like, you know, all at the same time as part of their mating ritual. So that like really got me excited about that painting. And, you know, also thinking about, well, then I started reading about fireflies, and they're kind of endangered. I mean, the stress from, you know, the pressures of climate change and all the, you know, things that we put in our environment have really put stress on insect populations, including the ones we love, like fireflies. So, and then those 2 little paintings have to do with the methane release that's coming from melting ice in the Arctic, and you know, that kind of thing. So as it goes around the room, you know, they're all the titles kind of reveal what the subject is. The drawings down there on the wall, those are actually mine. Some people might confuse them with Corey's work. But last year when the pandemic started, I just was like, I don't know what to do. I just was like, this is crazy. So when I was in graduate school with my friend Diane here, I used to work with Crayola crayons, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to pull those Crayola crayons back out and start working with them. So I did 12 of these drawings, 1 for each month of the kind of pandemic period. And their titles are kind of revealing also. They are in order. Double Jeopardy, No Way Out, Insidious, which the definition that I like is proceeding in a gradual, subtle way, but with harmful effects. And then Ignominious, which is defined as deserving or causing public disgrace or shame. So all of the pieces in that series have these kinds of titles, but and that's kind of what I'm working from. It's always like in here and trying to come out visually in some way that is beautiful somehow, you know. And I think I'm talking too much now.
Yeah, and titles are really critical as a window into the meaning of the work. That's really part of the work. So we spend a lot of time thinking about titles. That's another thing we do in the studio. Run that by each other.
Since you mentioned titles, my question is, do you do the painting and then the title comes to you? Or do you have sort of an idea of a title, not necessarily a specific title, but sort of what the idea is or whatever, and paint the painting, and then as you paint, the title kind of presents itself?
Well, for myself, Diane, I know that most of the time I will see an image or I'll hear a story about something that just ignites a picture in my mind. And for instance, was it 2 years ago when they had those horrific fires in Australia, and I kept seeing pictures of this red and this orange color that was everywhere. I mean, it was like the atmosphere was just on fire. And I thought I have to do a painting about that. So I did a couple paintings, about that subject. And now recently,
it has some resemblance.
Yeah. But like just yesterday in the New York Times, there was this article about how shipping, these giant shipping ships. They're ships that hold the shipping containers, are producing like contrails from the ocean. Like contrails that you would see in the sky, but they're coming up from the ocean because of the pollution that these giant, ships are creating. And it's creating like this pattern. So that's like a possible subject for me coming up, because so that's how I kind of catch things. How about you? Answer that one.
Well, I just want to say one thing about this painting here. I decided to not link the forms, so the forms do not link together. And that left it open to being able to be changed. And my brother, who's a mathematician, came up with the concept that this could be changed 6,000 times. They're squares, so they can just be rotated and rotated. In fact, I showed this painting one other time at Governor's State, but when I assembled it here, I changed it. So, it's like that. I can do anything I want with it. I've done 2 other versions of this. So about the title, Diane, I think more in terms of like series. So this would be Rondo number 1. So all my things are like that. All my things are like numbered usually. That's the Rondell series, obviously, and they're all numbered. So that's basically how my titles work. And we can talk about process too, but
I have a question about the labyrinth. Do you sense that your forms are creating pathways through the labyrinth, or are they the labyrinth itself?
I think
they're positive, negative space questions.
Yeah, they've kind of evolved. I mean, at one time I was actually using like an actual maze, and then when I got into this idea of the curved maze, like this actually came from a child's book of mazes. And then kind of just exploded from there. I started with interlacing ovals. I think it's just a suggestion of pathways. Where are these things going? If you look at some of the, are these like roadways or highways or, pathways? Where do they go? What's behind? What's in front? I had a group that came to the studio and they were looking at a big diptych, and they really got into that. They really started thinking about, they were expressing this, I wasn't. They were looking at, well, where does that blue go? Kind of ends there, So they're also meant to be kind of visual conundrums, visual puzzles. And that's the metaphor of, I didn't really get into this, the whole idea of the complexity of the world we live in today. A lot of you, not everybody, have lived in a world where there weren't cell phones. There wasn't the internet. What else? All kinds of stuff. Social media didn't exist.
Computer.
Yeah. Even computers. Yeah, I wrote my thesis on like some kind of word processor, that was dedicated. I still have it. But that was a different world. And what Jameson talks about in the postmodern is this idea of being decentered. You don't really know where you are. I used to ask my students, where are you in the internet? In cyberspace, can you really locate yourself? Anyway. Anything about technique?
Yeah, I'm curious about both your work, and I guess I have several questions, but one of them is, how do you start your day? Do you work every day? Do you go into your studio every day? Do you take a nap? I'm real curious about how other people work. Because especially with COVID, not being able to have the input of the outside, it seems to me like so much more difficult, even though I have much more time, it's so much more difficult to feel the incentive. So I'm curious about that. I guess there's several questions there.
Well, through the whole pandemic, we pretty much went about our lives like we did pre-pandemic.
But I appreciate what you just said about, like trying to find the motivation, kind of.
Yeah, like outside stimulus that feeds, and I'm not quite sure how, but
Yeah,
it sounds like you guys are real disciplined and just.
Well,
the studios saved our lives.
we went there as an
Spiritually.
escape too, or as a way to kind of keep some normalcy in our life, and because we weren't seeing any of our friends, for all these months, we didn't see anybody, but we kind of kept this kind of normal pace to our life by going there pretty much every day, even if we were only there for a couple hours, which is generally what happens, and we took plenty of naps and stuff like that.
Yeah, we had basically a routine. In the morning, we'd go for a walk, have lunch, go to the studio. And the studio is what draws you. Anybody who's an artist knows that you got to have something going. You got to have some kind of challenge, that's waiting for you in the studio to draw you there. And we always had that
Well, we used to
challenge.
refer to it as our happy place because we could go in there and
felt
kind of
that.
forget about, the stuff that was going on outside and pretend that, it's just like a normal day or something.
We all know it was weird. It was just weird.
Yeah, just weird.
It's like some science fiction movie.
And the psychology of it is real. I mean, real for all of us, right? And it was horrible.
But we were fortunate to have, very fortunate, to have this big studio space that we could go to, and it was really our place of respite,
Listening to music, and that's generally what we do there is listen to music and, talk. We talk to each other. We discuss things, or sometimes Corey will read, which I really like. Our studio is a huge mess, but we have all these. She's shaking her head, we have all these old magazines that are going back like decades, and Corey will pick one up and you'll start reading an article about something, and I just love that. It's like really, really fun.
So you read out loud?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I'm the reader.
Yeah, if he's waiting for paint to dry or something, like that. And,
Waiting for paint to dry, which brings up the whole issue of the paints that we use.
yeah, that's true.
I have to use acrylic. I mean, I've used oil before, and I've used encaustic, but for these pieces, I have to use acrylic. I need the drying time because these things take about 4 coats at least to get that real density of color.
Yeah.
And Adrienne and Alex, they were at the studio. Okay. And we talked about that. We talked about how these things actually get made, the whole process and everything. But Kathie, on the other hand, uses oil. So do you want to talk about that?
Well, I started out with an acrylic base, an acrylic ground, a colored ground, with this picture in my head of how the kind of color landscape that I want this painting to have in the end, sort of. And then I just, then I start throwing paint, but I'm throwing it in kind of a controlled manner. It's not just like haphazardly.
What do you use to design the tools?
I use a palette knife sometimes. I use a brush, depending, flipping, and a palette knife, and then sometimes I scrape And then I go back into these areas were kind of thrown and scraped, but this is all painted by hand. I go back in and paint the shapes. And some people have asked, they couldn't quite figure it out, like, were those poured on there? But they're not poured, they're painted, by hand with a tiny brush, which is basically, the painting that I actually do on them is done with a tiny brush to make that really flat, that really flat looking flow, to get that look. So, anyway, and then I have to wait days for my paint to dry. If I'm in the middle of a painting or something, I have to, just not sit around, I'll just do something else, but.
Yeah. And then sometimes you change a work. It sits for a while, and that one in particular, black and blue, really did not start out that way.
No, it sat around for months and I hated it, and I thought, what am I going to do with this? Just throw it away, or, So I decided to go back into it with black, and then I threw that blue stuff there, the blue paint down, and now I like it.
What was the ground color on when you first laid
I think
the acrylic?
I have to look, Peter, I can't even remember. But I think it was this light, now this one has a lighter ground, it's like that tan, it's like a tan kind of gray that's coming through. But then there is lighter gray paint on there also, but the one color is, thank you.
Very good.
You didn't tell about how you bang.
Oh yeah, something. The other thing you do is bang on the floor. Just take it and just to try to
Move the paint a little bit.
yeah, to do what I want them to do. Because I do have, there are things I want that paint to do, but I don't want to, be too. I don't know.
They're an interesting process because they look kind of abex, but they're really not. They take a long time to do. These are not something you do in one sitting, And Kathie will go in and use that little brush and paint.
Well, today I was, going through my email, and I came across this article about a show that Sean Scully is having right now in New York, and he's one of my favorite artists, and I hope you all know who he is. But obviously this pandemic had an impact on him too. And he said something in an interview related to this show that he has a listen gallery right now, and also in his studio. He opens up his very own Manhattan studio to visitors sometimes and has shows there, and you can just go and walk in. It's amazing. We actually stumbled on it one time. It's really wonderful. But
it's in Chelsea.
Yeah. He said, what really strikes me as tragic is that what is a relief for nature is a torment for humans, meaning that during the pandemic, nature seemed to come alive. The birds and, there were a lot of things that just started, the level of pollution went down briefly, things like that. And what is a pleasure for us is a torment for nature. That is the conundrum we have got ourselves into. And then it says, in his recent paintings, he's hoping to draw attention to this deeply disturbing irony, but at the same time, he, quote unquote, wants to keep despair in check and stop it from overwhelming the bigger picture. That was so, when I read that, I was like, wow, yeah, that is so important. You don't want all this stuff to overwhelm you, and that was inspiring to me I think there's a whole kind of thing going on in the atmosphere among creative people about how do you express yourself during this time. It's not always easy, I think. to balance.
The animals liked it when we were shut in. Yeah, they were having a good time.
Yeah, the animals were having a great time.
So what questions do you have? Anything?
I thought it was interesting that both of you actually end up, despite how different the structures are, having very precise formats that you work in. And yet, you know, you chorus the ovals and the play, the layers. You know, nobody ever took a painting class and was taught to bang the edge of the painting. But within that, Kathie has a very refined technique, and they both are dependent on a very refined technique. I thought that was very interesting because they were so superficially different in the way they've been executed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, precision is like really critical, you know. We usually refer, well, in my work, we refer to it as hard edge, you know, abstraction. But I think of it more as very precise abstraction. I can't seem to completely give that up. I did a couple things. These are very new. These are from 21. And what I was doing here was what's referred to as scumbling, where I started with a black ground and then painted the colors over the black so that I could let some of the brushwork, you know, come through, so that they're not as opaque as some of the other paintings. And that was, you know, that was just another approach. You know, you try to keep doing something that kicks the game up a little bit. So I did that one. That's the second one, and there's a small one over there. The small one, I used a very dark gray brown. The trick here, though, you know, that sounds, you know, okay, pretty matter of fact, but the trick is, you know, I'm painting the colors on top of the black. And the first coat is real rich, obviously, you know. So then I want to go in and do a second coat, but it has to be finessed. If I go too far, then it becomes opaque. So then I have to go back and paint it out again in black and start over. So it does need a little finessing to get just the right amount of nuance that I want. I don't want it to be too gestural, because it has to compete with the design itself. You know, so there's that tension between the actual forms and the paint quality.
And this is a question for both of you, how do you choose the colors you're going to work with? Do you, in your head, think I'm going to put these colors together and why? Or do you put out your colors and just go, no, maybe, let's see what happens, kind of thing?
Yeah.
So that's a question for both of you.
Okay, that's a good question. Because I use a lot of color. At one time, I never used color. It was always black or gray, you know. So I like really strong color. But every time, and I use basically primaries, secondaries, complementary colors. And I know where they're going to go. I map that out first in a sketch. You know, so I play with that. And then I put colors, you know, obviously next to each other that really work. But at the same time, I like playing with tonality, light and dark. So I'm always balancing that too. So two things, you know, the intensity of the color, and then also the value of the color. And then every time I move, you know, if I use orange in one painting, and I'm going to use it again, I'll change it. I'll do something to it. I've got these little, you know, like Tupperware containers that'll keep the colors in. And I've got a full range. Also, one other thing, I think of color also as mood. There are some where I'll like back there, that the one on the right is a deeper palette, you know, and sometimes I like that. I like working with an entirely dark. The colors are there, but they're all deeper in value.
Does that have to do with the metaphor that you have in mind?
Yeah.
Like, for instance, that one's more somber. This one is more lively, energetic, kind of because of the color.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, this one is kind of about the madness of the world. It's like kaleidoscopic, you know. You're kind of like,
yeah.
it's kind of hilarious in a way. Yeah.
Well, I think I choose my palettes kind of in a similar way. You know, wanting the colors to work, you know, in the traditional complements and opposites, and you know, in that sense. But also, if I have this subject in my head, like the one on the right back there, which is like about the melting ice, I tend to want it to be cool. You know,
Right.
really. So just the whole thing, I want the whole painting, I want to have a cool feeling to it, you know. So, and then, you know, it's the same for, I mean, the opposite for, you know, the hot, fiery ones, obviously. So.
I'm curious about the colors that you used in this middle one. For some reason, it just, I mean, they all stand out, and I don't know why, but I almost think of almost like comic book colors, but in a quieter way. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
But what's the title of that one?
That one is about methane, and I have to look because I'm not good at remembering my own titles.
Yeah.
It's either methane release or methane, you know, it has to do with the
gases.
Yeah, the gases that are coming up from the tundra and in the Arctic. So I wanted it to kind of have that ice, the icy coolness, and yet have this, you know, kind of bubbling kind of sense of the stuff is escaping.
Yeah, it's almost like the blue is kind of almost foreboding. And I mean, I always make up kind of what I think is going on when I look at work. And when it's like this lightness rising up, but that
turns
blue
dark.
is going to say, yeah, no, you know, it's more threatening. Anyway.
Well,
So I was just curious how you.
actually, I have the wrong title. It's about anthracite coal. So it's anthracite vein is what I call that one. And so the black, I mean, in a way it's sort of the same thing, in the same thought process with the methane stuff. But, you know, that's where the black is coming from. And then this one is called surface anthracite, so that's also about coal.
Yeah.
And that is a whole other, you know, bad subject for. But the methane, I have another. You know, I've done several paintings that are about the methane thing too, and they're kind of similar to me. You know, coal and methane.
Yeah, all that nasty stuff.
Yeah, nasty stuff that's coming out of the earth that, you know, we just don't stop doing, you know. But I do kind of think about, I want the colors to be beautiful. I really do. I mean, I want the paintings to be beautiful. I want that kind of
Right.
contrast between this, what I'm thinking about and what the result is, you know.
Yeah.
So I do want them to be pretty.
That's really important. As dark as the references are, you know, when you see these viruses, you know, the virus, when you see images of it, it's actually quite beautiful.
Yeah.
But we know it's like deadly. You know, so it has that dichotomy. And actually, Kathie had a dream that this is the way we were going to put up these circles. We didn't really know how we were going to do the circles.
Yeah.
And she had a dream of doing it like this. And also the walls curved, you know, so it kind of made perfect sense.
Yeah.
And it was really fun to do it that way. And I think of them as like spores. Nobody asked about the circle. You know, the circle has a lot of references, obviously, you know, about things that are circular, like history, you know, that goes round and round, and the circle of life. It's you know, it's an ancient symbol. It's maybe the first geometric symbol because you can the so-called ancient man could see the moon. Ancient woman could see the moon. Yeah. So that probably was the first kind of geometric form because there weren't a lot of squares around. You know? That had to be invented.
The square.
Yeah.
Square. I think your color sense on all of these is just spectacular. It's just amazing to see how you have used the intensity of the color and where the color is not intense and pale, how they work together, and also the dark and light on all of these. Yeah.
And powerful. The colors are so powerful.
So I've been doing a lot of circles. But I did circles going all the way back to the 70s. Did a whole series of circular canvases, paper pieces. So it's not a new thing. It just kind of emerged a few years back. I was asked to be, well, Kathie was too, in this show that was about circles. And that led me back to doing a circular painting.
They seem like they take you a while to do because the lines are so precise that you have to work. I don't know. Do they take a long time to do? Then you have to be real
Not as long as you might think, but I've done this a long time. So I'm pretty good at it. But one point, though, that I think is important to your question is when I started working with the circle, I couldn't just superimpose it, you know, like over one of my square works.
Yeah.
I purposely worked with the circle itself, the form, and you can see that. You know, you can see I'm following the actual form itself or trying to bubble out from it. I would send some of these images to friends, and they thought, when they saw them on the screen, they thought they were three-dimensional. And you can see a full kind of mood in these from some of the, you know, the kind of jumpier ones, you know, and playful, to ones that are darker.
Yeah.
But they've been fun, yeah.
The origin drawing that you were referencing, I don't know if it's a drawing, the one on the table.
This?
I don't characterize it correctly, but yeah, it has this like feeling of like a interlacing of manuscripts and things like that, which you know, I can see in the paintings, of course, but in a more like claustrophobic way in the actual paintings.
Ah,
And then these pieces that I think you said are more recent.
yeah.
There's just, I don't know if it's just me, but there's like a different spatial sensibility to them than the other ones. And I don't know if it's the scumbling, you know, the way the paint's applied, or, but you know, I look at it like there's a figure ground thing that starts to happen with this sort of oval shape that is different than the interlacing. You know, so I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Is it more open? Does it seem more open? Or?
They're flat.
It's just different. Yeah, like even here there's a different sense of space. Like,
Oh, yeah. This one's very, very different. Right.
yeah.
Yeah. This is what I try to do, and this is like probably kind of restrictive, but Mason was in here earlier, and he said that my work reminded him of that I was obviously referencing Frank Stella, and that's true. And then he mentioned Bill Conger, and I said, no, I said, Bill, you guys familiar with Bill Conger's work?
Yeah.
I said, Bill would he'd shade this. You know what I mean? This would have a, you know, go from, you know, kind of modeling of, I keep everything flat. The only way I use, or try to use space is through overlapping or some kind of twist. Like this one twists around, you know, it creates this kind of spatial quality. And then you kind of go in.
Yeah, it's not from shading. I think it's like the color choices
Maybe the color, yes.
This one, I think, seems much more solid, and these shapes seem more solid to me. They don't seem as, like, there doesn't seem to be that same kind of, like, swirling or something.
Yeah, like in the other.
Yeah.
The other one is very active.
Right.
These-
And
this-
even that one is more active than
Oh,
this
yeah,
one.
this one's. Yeah.
But this is how we talk to each other in the studio, too. Start
It must have been nice to have a shared studio during the pandemic. A lot of artists were like alone in their studio. At least we could
Oh,
get something, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
we were blessed. Yeah. But we've had the studio how many years now?
I think it's like 13 years.
13 years.
The same space. You know.
And we never seem to argue in the studio.
That's amazing. Are you telling the truth?
But outside.
There have been one or two. There have been, don't. But usually not about art or anything like that. It's usually about some kind of, you know, dumb thing, you know.
Yeah. I get that. So what's the title of this one over here that you were talking about?
Oh, Black and Blue. And that painting actually precedes a little bit the obsession I have with climate change and stuff like that. It's a little bit earlier, and where I was really starting, I just was kind of experimenting with how to use the paint there more than thinking about the metaphoric content. But the black and blue, when it became black and blue, then it kind of had a sort of, there's an inference in that title, you know, violence or something.
If you haven't seen these Crayola drawings, you should take a look at them and think about how they were actually made. One thing about Kathie's work is that it's very, takes a long time. Nothing she does is fast.
Well, when I first started doing those and I showed some people, they were like, oh, that's, Corey's work is changing or something like that. And I said, he's not the only one that can use a curve, you know.
I don't like a lot of people using curves. No, it all came from Frank Stella's Protractor series. I don't even know if anybody's even familiar with that series anymore. it kind of ended around 1970. But it was one of his most popular series. And that, you know, I was a young artist, really taken with that series. The idea that you can create an entire series of paintings with a simple protractor.
Yeah.
You know? Well, of course, these things were huge. Some of them were 20 feet long. But what I was struck by, and I wasn't the only one, there were Larry Zacks, William T. Williams, even a current painter, Sarah Morris. The idea of the line between the colors was what I was really drawn to. I really liked that. Who knows why, you know, but I've never given it up. What I have changed is he only used like white for the line. All my lines are usually a color, and that's the ground color that I start with. And then I draw the shape with the templates, and then I tape that line, and then I paint over it. So it's kind of a taping in reverse.
Gotcha.
But I only tape once, which is nice.
Those lines really make the shapes pop.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's why I like it. And I used to, I've given this up for a while, I don't know why exactly, but I used to actually have a line between that bisected the color. It was a black marker line. That actually gave it even more of a pop.
So, okay, my question to both of you then is, where do you see your work going from here? Will you continue with what you're kind of onto right now, or do you see yourself moving in any kind of direction? Like, I'm assuming this one came later, and you're talking about this kind of being
Recent, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess.
Yeah, I'm playing with the paint a little bit more. I had done this before, this kind of scumbled effect, but not with a lot of color. I would start with a black ground, draw the design out, tape it, and then I would like wash color over it. Sometimes the color would be very nuanced.
Yeah.
But it would be one color. It would be like gray, you know, over the black. This was the first time I did that with color.
So will you continue to do these ellipses?
Probably.
Or play, like,
Yeah.
is that one's later also?
Yeah. This one, and the one in the back.
'Cause
But that's a good. What's not here, I have other series that I work with. So I may go back to some of those. They're all built off of the templates, but they're different. I think even for Kathie too, right?
Well,
So,
yeah. Actually, this year, you know, after the pandemic, I kind of was like, wow, okay, now what, you know? So I started doing a series of small watercolor paintings that are geometric, that are based on geometry.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and well, that kind of harkens back to architecture for me a little bit. But then these little paintings are starting to look like landscapes through the geometry.
Yeah.
Just because of the color, you know, and stuff like that. So I'm kind of weighing, okay, do I want to go over that territory that's been, you know, stepped on a lot?
Oh, this is what she's been doing.
Oh yeah, I forgot that they were going to be in the show, a couple of them, but then I didn't I decided not to, so,
Yeah.
And they're all freehand again, you know.
Those are watercolors?
Yeah, they're watercolors. And they're freehand, I don't do any taping, so
Wow.
that's part of this, the kind of, you know, like 10, those are 10 by 10, so that's almost like full size right there.
A lot of
That's pretty
control.
equivalent. Yeah, something you can control, but I am starting to do some oil, like I just started with oil painting based on the same
Yeah.
idea, but it is hard. I mean, I don't know, art is, you know, you all know. I don't know why I'm doing any of this really, in a way.
But it's fun.
You know, it's
It's
like I
madness.
like to think how incredibly fortunate to be able to go there.
Yeah,
And I mean, it's so amazing. And to be able to, you can decide where you want to go. You can, you know, it's just, it's amazing.
it is amazing.
Lucky,
It really,
lucky,
really
lucky.
is amazing.
Yeah.
And I couldn't be more grateful, you know,
Yeah.
to have that kind of freedom.
Yeah. It's wonderful.
So we'll see
Thanks,
where
everybody. I think-
anything goes, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah. So you can-